Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here. And today, our deep dive is going to be on risk. Now, specifically, we're talking about artificial intelligence because artificial intelligence development is now outpacing risk assessments. And if you're a longtime listener, follower, whatever you are of mine, you know that obviously in cybersecurity, we start with risk first. It's one of our specialties. If we don't understand your risk and we can't quantify your risk, then how can we properly defend you? And so this is something that I've talked about on stage, on air, et cetera, quite a lot. And quite frankly, it's coming to fruition when it comes to artificial intelligence. This is actually not a good prospect for the future. Now, there was a really good write-up by George Hammond of the Financial Times, so I'm cribbing heavily from here, but I think it's important because the structure that Mr. Hammond lays out, I think, is incredibly important to understand because the increasing power of the latest artificial intelligence systems is stretching traditional evaluation methods literally to the breaking point, posing a challenge to both businesses and public bodies over how best to work with fast evolving technology. Now, if you're also a longtime listener and follower, you know that I was speaking to the heads of many of the data protection authorities in Rome earlier this year regarding AI regulation. And this is what we're talking about. This is the crux of the issue that the regulators are having, not just us on the security side as well. Flaws in the evaluation criteria commonly used to gauge performance, accuracy, and safety are being exposed as models are basically come to market, and that's according to the people that are building, testing, and investing in these AI tools. The traditional tools are easy to manipulate and too narrow for the complexity of the latest rounds of artificial intelligence. The accelerating technology race sparked by the release of ChatGPT back in 2022 essentially has fed tens of billions of dollars into OpenAI from big tech companies. Microsoft, Google, Amazon, etc. are now obliterating the old yardsticks that were assessing artificial intelligence's progress over the decades. In other words, ChatGPT essentially and OpenAI, the maker of ChatGPT, dropped a supercharger into the adoption and spread of artificial intelligence in a way that we simply haven't seen. And that's why you see people like Satya Nadella, head of Google, Microsoft, coming out and saying, yeah, this is a huge problem. Like, this is going to be in absolutely everything. This is the new iPhone. This is the new Fire invention for mankind. So, according to Aidan Gomez, who's the founder and chief executive of the AI startup Cohere, and I quote, "A public benchmark has a lifespan. It's useful until people have optimized their models to it or gamed it. That used to take a couple of years. Now it's a couple of months. In other words, you have that framework for testing, for assessment, and the artificial intelligence models are getting so intelligent that they can now align themselves with it to simply outperform. Now, Google, Anthropic, Cohere, and Mistral have each released AI models over the past 2 months as they are attempting to basically combat and hopefully unseat Microsoft and as they back OpenAI. Microsoft has invested billions into OpenAI, basically from the top public rankings of large language models, or LLMs, that basically underpin ChatGPT and the others. This is the new race, and these new systems are routinely emerging that can completely, quote unquote, ace existing benchmarks, according to Gomez. Quote, "As models get better, the capabilities make these evaluations obsolete," end quote. Now, the problem of how to actually assess large language models has shifted from academia to the boardroom as generative AI has become the top investment priority of 70% of chief executives, according to a KPMG survey of more than 1,300 global CEOs. This is taking the world by storm. And when the corporations, those that typically lead and run the economy of the entire world, whatever the vertical is, when 70% of them are adopting artificial intelligence, this is coming for everybody. You know, it's like that Brookings Institute the Brookings Institute survey that basically said that we're going to have 300 million displaced jobs, 30 million losing their jobs. That could be accelerating. Now, according to Shelley McKinley, chief legal officer at GitHub, that's a repository for code that's now owned by Microsoft, quote, "People won't use technology they don't trust. It's incumbent on companies to put out trustworthy products," end quote. And that's true, but it also talks essentially about the backdrop of how we are expanding and growing these things. And so naturally, we have to pivot to the governments of the world here and how they are handling artificial intelligence, if they really are. Now, governments are struggling with how to deploy and manage the risks of the latest AI models. This past week, and as you're listening or possibly watching this, the United States and United Kingdom signed a landmark bilateral agreement on AI safety, building on new AI institutes that the two countries set up last year to, quote, minimize surprise from rapid and unexpected advancements in AI, unquote. Obviously, you can't speak for other countries or how other countries are going to handle their artificial intelligence development, growth, use for whatever that application is, whether it's civilian, government, or even military. That's what we're talking about. Now, U.S. President Joe Biden issued an executive order last year calling on government bodies, including the National Institutes for Standards and Technology, or NIST, to produce benchmarks for evaluating the risks of AI tools. The NIST is one of those core standards here in the United States that develops those frameworks. The NIST 800-171 framework, for example, for private businesses doing business with the government, is one of those standards for cybersecurity. But in an ever-evolving and ever-pacing, outpacing framework that is artificial intelligence, we're going way beyond that. Now, whether it's assessing safety, performance, or efficiency, the groups tasked with stress testing AI are rushing to keep up. Now, according to Rishi Bhamsani, who leads the team at the Stanford Center for the Research on Foundation Models, quote, this top-level decision many companies are making is, should we use an LLM and which should we use? And there's been so many integrations, good or bad. Air Canada had a bad integration that cost them in court. Now, Bhamasani's team has developed the holistic evaluation of language models, which tests reasoning, memorization, and susceptibility to disinformation, among other criteria. Other public systems, for the record, include the Massive Multitask Language Understanding Benchmark, which is a data set built in 2020 by Berkeley students to test models on questions from 57 subject areas. Another one is Human Eval. That judges coding ability across 164 programming problems. But here's the crux of the issue. These evaluations I just talked about are struggling to keep up with the sophistication of today's AI models, which can execute a string of connected tasks over a long horizon. And such complex tasks are harder to evaluate in controlled settings. According to Mike Volpe, he's a partner at the venture capital firm Index Ventures, which obviously tracks and invests in these things, and I quote, the first thing to recognize is that it's very hard to really properly evaluate models in the same way it's very hard to properly evaluate humans. If you look at one thing like, can you jump high or run fast? It's easy. But human intelligence? It's almost an impossible task. Now, another growing concern about public tests is that models' training data can include the precise questions used in evaluations. In other words, if the evaluation for the risk model is public knowledge and it's already being consumed by the large language model, it's going to know exactly what the optimal answer is and simply go to it. According to Bhamasani, quote, that might not be deliberate cheating. It might be more innocuous, but we're still learning how to limit this contamination problem between what the models are trained on and what they're tested on, end quote. In other words, that's a very difficult thing. These large language models are designed to basically consume all of the internet. And if they're consuming all of that, then they're consuming published research on how to test AI, which means they can formulate proper responses based on the literal research by the humans. Benchmarks are quote unquote very monolithic, he added. We're assessing how powerful LLMs are, but your assessment as a company is more than that. You need to factor in the cost and whether you want open source where code is publicly available or closed source, end quote. Now, another one of these, Hugging Face, is a $4.5 billion startup that you've probably never heard of, but they provide tools for developing artificial intelligence, and basically they're an influential platform for open source models, and they host a leaderboard called LMSys, LMSYS. That ranks models on their ability to complete bespoke tests set by individual users rather than on a fixed set of questions. In other words, humans have the ability to come up on the fly with things. test it through this platform to get essentially a reasonable score and result, meaning it simply couldn't have read it on the internet like 2 years ago and now understand the question instantly. As a result of that, it more directly captures the actual preference of the users that are using the artificial intelligence platform. Now, that leaderboard is helpful for individual users, but it's more of limited use to corporations, which will have specific requirements for AI models. And that's 100% true. If the AI is really good at interacting with me, talking to me, whether it's, telling me the most optimal way to drive my car for better gas mileage or just thwarting my loneliness, that's different than a corporation that's saying, hey, we have a 5-year economic growth plan. Let's talk about that. And you might have that personally, but it's not what a corporation is. Now, Coheres Gomez also recommends that businesses build, quote, an internal test set which only needs hundreds of examples, not thousands, end quote. And I guess I'll continue with that quote as well because I can't read my own notes. We always say that human evaluation is the best. It's the most high signal representative way of judging performance, end quote. Now, individual business choices of models are as much art as they are science. Every business is different. And I like to say when I'm talking to various businesses, even if they're in the same vertical, all of them are like fingerprints in the sense that while you could be in healthcare or construction or finance or take your pick, essentially what you're doing may be wholly unique based on the choices that you've got, the company culture that you've got, the interactions with your people, how you've streamlined business, how you've got middle management or upper management design, the applications, the tools, the processes you're using. So while you may all be treating cancer or building a building or investing in whatever, the approaches may be different, and therefore a one-size-fits-all for artificial intelligence is not the way to go. Quote, these metrics are like when you purchase a car and it has this much horsepower and this much torque and goes from 0 to 60 in an hour. The only way you really decide to buy it is for taking it for a drive. And that is 100% correct. And that's what we're talking about here. If you're going to be adopting in your business or your organization an artificial intelligence, you really need a demo of it. You really need to understand its capabilities. From the cybersecurity side, you really also need to understand its privacy. Understand that anything you're feeding to ChatGPT, if you're spending $20 a month on it or you're using it for free, is going to be fed into ChatGPT, meaning OpenAI is going to get a copy of it. So you're not going to want to upload your sensitive financial information or your intellectual property or anything along those lines. It's really good for generic, non-specific questions, but this is what we're talking about. So we're going to see where this goes, but this is obviously going to be a huge thing for the future. And as the world continues to adopt artificial intelligence and large language model platforms for more and more applications, and if you're, again, a longtime listener or follower of mine, you know I've talked about those applications, good or bad, whether it's disinformation, or it's productivity. We're all in that boat. And so we need to come up with ever-evolving changes, strategies, and benchmarks, but I think we also need to set off a portion of the internet that simply cannot be searched by any artificial intelligence in some way, shape, or form. Now, not everybody's going to, let's say, abide by those rules. We can't talk to adversarial governments, like Russia, for example. If they've got large language models they're developing, you think they're going to have scruples about using it for disinformation or hacking or any one of those things? No. And so by virtue of that, the United States and all of the United States' allies are not going to stop developing that capability as well. So that is the world that we're living in. Do I think the Terminators are coming in the next 3 to 5 years? No. But we are forever changing the landscape of how we interact. And it's a very real possibility to say, according to one of my colleagues that shall remain nameless due to Chatham House rules, but said, we may have invented, meaning humans, we humans may have invented the last thing we're ever going to invent. And by virtue of that, it's the computers, it's the artificial intelligence that gets the assist or the nod for the creativity. Look at Higgs boson, what the quote-unquote God particle. Higgs and boson, the scientists would have never been able to find that if it hadn't been for an AI sifting through literal petabytes of data to find the anomalies they were looking for to confirm their hypotheses. An army of humans would not have been able to go through that data in a lifetime, and that's what we're talking about. So with that, I'll leave you with that thought, good, bad, or ugly. Obviously, I'd love to hear what you have to say about it, but that is your deep dive of the week. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP, and please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please attempt to stay private. Thanks, everybody.